scary thought, isn't it? Well, it probably isn't very scary if you don't actually know what propaganda is in the first place. Propaganda is defined as essentially biased or misleading information used to promote a particular point of view, often political in nature, and it often uses loaded words in order to elicit an emotional response rather than a rational one. Simply speaking, propaganda is mind control without all the fancy sci-fi bits. If you get propaganda right, your ideology can survive, even in the face of cold, hard facts. The Soviet Union would have ceased to exist much earlier if not for the use of propaganda. In fact, some countries even today are still resisting revolution with propaganda of their own. North Korea. So, in order to understand why propaganda works so well, I think it is important to understand the origins of propaganda first. Propaganda may seem like a modern idea, but that is only because the term is a modern one. Its origins actually lie in the rational-minded direct democracy of the ancient Greek city-state of Athens. Its citizens were conscious and well-informed of the problems and interests of their beloved city-state, and so propaganda and counter-propaganda were necessary in order to make the public think a certain way so that decisions could be made. After all, in a direct democracy, you need a majority opinion to do much of anything. The Athenians used plays, speeches, art, games, and even religious festivals in order to convince the public of a certain opinion. This ancient Greek amphora depicts an epic victory designed to romanticize war. Even ancient Greek myths were, at their core, propaganda, designed to inspire people and make them think that something greater exists out there. Ever since then, propaganda has played a major role in almost all societies. The concept of feudalism could not exist without religion, and the Roman Catholic Church was very good at using religion as a form of propaganda. As long as the serfs believed that they were suffering for some greater cause, they were content, or at least forced to be content. Propaganda is always enhanced by the threat of violence. Propaganda has also played an essential role in about every revolution you can think of, including the American, French, and Bolshevik revolutions, where flyers and other such mediums spread ideas like wildfire, and those ideas were then armed with guns against the ruling monarchs. Speaking of the Bolshevik Revolution, let's fast forward to World War I, where the advent of new technologies, such as the newspaper and the radio, allowed information to be spread more quickly than ever before. And with the rise of new communist and fascist ideologies, these new technologies allowed for the creation of propaganda that was more widespread and effective than ever before. Actually, let's slow down a bit here. So, they say hindsight is 20/20, and in situations like these, we now definitely see the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany as bad ideas. And I don't want to say that they weren't bad ideas, because they were definitely bad ideas. I mean, did you know that 10 million Ukrainians were killed in a man-made Soviet famine called the Holodomor? I was born there. However, I do want to say that the American public's opinion of these countries is heavily affected by propaganda. How many of you know what the Holocaust is? Raise your hands. Now, how many of you know what the Great Leap Forward is? How many of you knew that around 25% of Cambodia's population was killed due to the policies of the Khmer Rouge? And a scary 60% of these deaths were due to executions. Now, obviously, we know more about the crimes of Nazi Germany because America participated directly in a war against Nazi Germany. During World War II, American cartoons depicted Hitler and the Nazi Party as a bunch of doomed fools. Imperial Japan was depicted as fanatic and without mercy. And even Japanese Americans were seen as ready to sabotage the US war effort at the blow of a whistle. Propaganda made World War II the war of good against bad and nothing else. This sort of sentiment had several ill effects, however, as the cruel internment of Japanese Americans likely would not have been supported by the general public if not for the propaganda engine that made many otherwise rational people believe that all Japanese were out to get us. Ever since then, propaganda has played an increasingly large role in politics and society at large. The U.S. has spent $2.5 trillion on the war on drugs, and many people who were born in the 80s or 90s can distinctly remember the message that drugs are bad being hammered into their brains. After 9/11, the public was scared and confused, and the U.S. government swooped in with propaganda to direct that confusion and temper it into anger for the Iraq War, which may or may not have been beneficial for certain members of the U.S. government, but that's a story for another day. Propaganda has also been used to influence elections, with some of the more modern examples being bots on social media that spread fake news about candidates or issues. But why do people believe propaganda and fake news? Looking back at old propaganda today, it is easy to see how biased and skewed it was. And while modern propaganda may be slightly more subtle, all of it still works on the same basic principle. You are much more likely to believe in something that you agree with than something that you disagree with. This is called confirmation bias, and it is something that is definitely an issue nowadays with the widespread advent of fake news and shock media. Why fact check something that you believe in? This kind of attitude has the power to influence elections and therefore the world around us heavily. Confirmation bias is at the core of lots of propaganda, whether it's a flyer from World War I telling us that we're winning the war, or a promotional video from the U.S. Army that plays heroic music as a pilot poses next to a fighter jet. In short, propaganda is something that is here to stay, but it is still something that we can fight back against. You are not immune to propaganda, especially if it is propaganda that you agree with. But I think that whenever you want to take a stance on something, it is necessary to take a moment, stop, think, and ask yourself, where did I get my opinion from? Having the willpower to answer a question like that, honestly, is half the battle. If you got said opinion from the internet, there are many websites such as Snopes or FactCheck that you can use to make sure that the foundations that your opinion is built off of are solid. Another question you can ask yourself to help make yourself more resistant to propaganda is, where did they get their opinions from? Instead of thinking of the other side as mindless drones, look at the problem from their perspective. Don't think that the other side is stupid just because they're the other side. And lastly, spread the word with people you know. Spread these ideas that I've covered. Having an enlightened populace is the first real step to a better and less selfish society.